All right, you guys. So we are back. We are going to be doing a recap of the game played today between Daniil Dubov and Vidit Gujrathi in the Tata Steel Masters tournament. All right, today was round 3. Of course, there were a lot of decisive games, you guys, but one of them really stands out in particular, and that is the game between Dubov and Vidit. Obviously, Dubov very well known for playing aggressive and original ideas, and this game is no different. So we start with e4. e5 is played here. Knight to f3. Knight to c6 is played here. And now bishop c4. So Dubov chooses to play potentially an Evans Gambit, potentially Gucci Piano, maybe additionally a Scotch Gambit as well. So knight f6 is played here. Dubov plays d3. He does not play knight g5, trying to go into the fried liver, because if you play knight g5, d5, e takes d5, black can obviously take on d5, which would allow knight f7, king f7, queen f3. And after king e6, knight c3, knight c7, I believe it's d4. This is considered to be winning for white. This is what is known as the fried liver. Don't ask me why it is called that, but it is one of the most original openings in the game of chess. However, after knight g5, d5, e takes d5, black can play many different moves like knight to a5, knight to d4, even b5 here is played by Magnus Carlsen. So after knight f6, d3 is played. One other advantage to playing knight f6, by the way, is that if you play bishop c5 here, white can play b4 and play the Evans Gambit like Antonio Radic, also known as a Gadmator. So knight f6 is played, d3 played here, bishop to c5. So we end up in a classic Gucci Piano, the very slow version. c3 is played here by Dubov, d6, and now bishop g5. Again, pretty standard, h6, bishop h4. a5 played here by Vidit, and now knight to a3 is played by Dubov. Now, this is a very original move. It's not perhaps normal, you could say. Generally, when white plays knight a3, usually white has played a4. Say a4, castles, rook e8, knight to a3. This is one line that has been played before. White goes knight c2 and knight to e3. And of course, if you take with the bishop, white takes back with the rook, and his pawn structure is very much intact here. So by playing knight a3, Dubov poses Vidit with a very important question. Do you want to take the knight here, or do you want to basically just play it normal, say a move like castles, or maybe even bishop e6? So in this position, Vidit takes up the challenge. He takes on a3. And so now Dubov takes on a3. And what you'll notice is white has what we call the bishop pair. White has 2 bishops and a knight on the board. Black has 2 knights and the bishop. So the bishop pair sometimes can be very fatal, especially at the top level, because the bishop, in general terms, is considered to be slightly better than the knight. However, it's also worth noting that white has compromised the pawn structure here with pawns on a2 and a3. At the same time, white does have the idea of rook to b1 to use this open file, and it's going to be very hard really to attack these double pawns on a2 and a3 here. So after b takes a3, Vidit plays queen e7. He does not castle here because I think after castles, white can castle, and now if you try to break this very nasty pin by playing g5, white can sacrifice, and after takes, bishop g5, say you play a move like king g7, white goes f4, and you're really under a lot of pressure here on this f file, which is going to open up very shortly. White also has like queen f3 and queen g3 to attack the king as well. So this is all over but the crying for black. Vidit, to his credit, does not fall for this. Instead, he plays queen to e7, and now Dubov castles. Vidit plays knight to b8. Now, this is perhaps a strange move. I suspect up to this point, both players, well, maybe not both players, but Dubov certainly was in preparation here, and knight b8 I think caught him by surprise. Having said that, one of the most difficult things in chess when you're preparing is looking for moves that are human and not solely the top computer moves. Now, I know that people in my chat earlier, they were saying that knight b8 was the 6th move on the list of moves that a computer recommends, but for a human it's actually quite logical, because you want to reroute the knight to d7 and guard against potential pin threats on this diagonal from h4 to e7. For example, say white plays a move like, I'll just make some random moves, a4, knight d7. Let's just say rook c1, castles, and say a move like queen c2. After g5 takes and bishop g5, the knight now is very well defended here by the knight on d7. The knight on f6 is very well protected. So it's a very human move, and it's a very logical move. But one thing that's very difficult is when we're doing preparation with computers, you generally only look at the absolute top moves. You sometimes forget to look at it like a human, and I've had this happen many times during a game where I do preparation, and it's what I've expected happens at the board. And when we get to like a certain point in the game, I'm like, okay, well, I know there's this move knight h5, or there's this move knight d5, and then I'm like, but what about this move pawn to a6? And I was just like, why didn't I consider that? And that's because when you look at the computer, you become very prone to only look at the top computer moves as opposed to thinking like a human. And as we know from the Matrix, we are still only human at the end of the day. Knight to b8 is played here, and now d4 is played by Dubov. Knight bd7 to guard the pawn on e5, and additionally guarding the knight on f6 here. Rook to b1 is played by Dubov, and now g5 played by Vidit. Very nice move, very good choice in my opinion, trying to play this. He goes into the complications. I think at this point, with white having the bishop pair, if you try to just castle here and white plays something like rook e1, white has a very nice center, c3, d4, e4. White additionally has the bishop pair, and both these diagonals from h4 to e7 and c4 to g8 are very good for white. So white has a lot of advantages in this potential position, and Vidit decides to go g5 here, taking up the challenge, throwing down the gauntlet, and choosing to grab the material. The bishop to g3 is played here by Dubov. Knight takes e4 is played by Vidit. Queen to c2, and now Vidit plays a move that, with perfect computer play, is not considered right, but it's a move that I actually feel makes the most sense if you don't happen to have a computer handy to cheat with. So f5 is played here by Vidit. Now the computer says that you can play knight takes g3, but after f takes g3, when you're looking at this as a human, it looks very scary. There's an open f file here. There's a bishop on c4. There's a rook on f1. You also maybe have a slight weakness on f5 as well in this position. So it feels very, very wrong to do this. Computer, of course, says, I don't care. I play knight b6. I develop my bishop castle to the queen side. Nobody cares. It's just chess. Nothing to be worried about. Don't see the boogeyman. Don't worry about things like bishop f7, queen f7, knight e5, because you can very simply play a move like queen h7, queen to e2, and just take the juicer. And after queen e5, king d8, you're not getting checkmated. So again, for computers, it's very easy. For us humans, it's not very logical, obviously. King d8, yes, of course. So here f5 is played by Vidit. Vidit chooses to play like a human because, again, we are only human and we are better than computers. Thank you so much to Bell and Kaya for the raid with 266. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. So after f5, we have d takes e5, which is played here. So we have d takes e5, and now Vidit takes with the pawn on d6. He takes on e5 as well. Again, very solid center for black in general terms. All the pawns appear to be holding. At the same time, however, you do have a slight issue, which is your king and your rooks and your bishop on c8 are all underdeveloped, or actually just not developed at all, I should say. And so there is some serious potential for things to go wrong here due to the lack of development. So here Dubov plays rook fe1. Logical move, trying to put more pressure on the center of the board, because again, Vidit cannot castle here. So here Vidit plays knight takes g3. Dubov takes with the h pawn. Now Vidit plays e4. Now it looks like temporarily black is okay here. Your center is kind of safe here. Everything looks good. If you get like knight e5 or knight c5, followed by bishop to d7 and castles long, it feels like black should be okay. However, here white plays g4, which smashes at the pawn chain, hitting the base on f5. If the pawn on f5 falls, then the second pawn on e4 will collapse as well. So after g4, it looks like black is in a lot of trouble, because if you take the pawn, rook takes e4 would simply win a lot of material. The king on e8, the queen on e7, and you can't really do anything about it. You can probably take the knight and get a knight and a rook for the queen, but it's just not going to be enough, especially, say, a position like rook e1, king d8, and queen to, I'm going to say g6 here, and you'll notice black is, rooks aren't developed, bishop's not developed, king's not developed. You're just losing here. So it looks really bad, but Vidit finds the best move. He plays knight to c5, creates a great outpost here. You guard the pawn on e4, and most importantly, this knight cannot be dislodged. It's very nicely guarded by the queen, and because white's pawn structure is ruined here, there's no way to attack this knight. If you could put this pawn on d4 or b4, you could remove the knight, but because of the pawn structure, it's not possible. So after knight to c5, Dubov plays knight to d4, trying to put more pressure on the center here. Now here, Vidit starts playing some absolutely fantastic chess. Here he plays rook f8. Now, you might think, well, wait a second, why don't you just take a pawn? You're up 2 pawns. But if you take the pawn, now white can undermine your knight on c5 by going knight to b3. And now you have a lot of problems guarding this pawn. And right now, the only thing preventing black from losing on the spot is that the center of the board, at least this e file, is closed. If both the d and the e files open up, black will have to resign almost instantly. So here Vidit plays rook f8 to guard the pawn at f5. Now knight b3 is far less effective because the pawn is still guarding, the pawn at f5 still guards the pawn at e4. And let's just say you play a move like bishop d7 to highlight the point. After g takes f5, bishop takes f5, your bishop still guards the pawn. So even if knights come off the board, you're still keeping the center somewhat closed. So here g takes f5 is played by Dubov. Bishop takes f5. And now rook takes b7 is played by Dubov. And at the time, I felt very confident that Dubov was probably going to win this game because this is a shot from out of nowhere. It's a huge surprise to the system because you don't really expect a move like this. But after rook takes b7, black really has to think carefully about what to do. If you play knight takes rook here, you actually lose the game more or less, because now here white can play this move bishop to b5. Not knight takes f5, to be clear, because after rook takes f5, rook takes e4, black can play rook e5 to block the pin, and now black is just up a rook in this position. So bishop to b5 is the actual problem. Now if you go king to d8, I have knight c6 forking the king and the queen. If you go bishop to d7, now I can play rook takes e4. And even though you're probably going to get two rooks for the queen, like a position like this, after bishop d7, king d7, white is winning because your king is just way too open here. I think probably the cleanest way, I'm going to guess, is queen h7, rook f7, queen h6. And again, there's queen e6. g5 is loose. The white king is very safe as well, with the pawns in front of the king here. And the only other option that black has here is to play king f7. But after king f7, now white goes knight takes f5, and there are a couple different options here, but I'll just use one to illustrate the point. Let's just say black goes queen f6 here. White can play queen takes e4, and now your king is very open. Your idea is like bishop c4. So say you go knight c5, for example, or actually let's say you go knight d6, for example. White can trade, go queen h7 check, queen g7, and now there's bishop c4 check hitting the king. And after king f6, rook e6 check to go back. And now there are many ways for white to win. Probably the cleanest is to go rook e5, creating the discovered check, king to f6, and then boom, queen f5 checkmate. And ouch, 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 ouch. That's checkmate. So again, in this position, if you reach it, your king is simply too open here after queen f6, queen e4, and white will win the game. So that's why you can't really take the rook. Now, to his credit, Vidit keeps his nerve here. And one thing that I've said about Vidit in the past is that my one criticism of him is that he doesn't always handle his nerves well. When he's under pressure, he seems to crack just a little bit, and that's probably his biggest weakness. Now, here it would be very easy to lose control for many reasons. First of all, Vidit's leading the tournament with 1.5 points out of 2. So because he's leading the tournament, it's very easy to be like, oh no, what's going on? I cannot lose this game. I must not lose. It's very easy to get these thoughts in your head that are very negative, and you kind of start to lose control. Secondarily, of course, just the pure shock of seeing rook takes b7 on the board is also very, very hard for the system to deal with. But to his credit, Vidit does not lose his nerve. He plays rook to f6 here. And now after rook f6, the idea is very simply to scoot the king out of the way. Say, for example, you play a move like h5. I mean, of course, there are many ways to win, but the biggest problem is that after bishop b5, you cannot go king f7 because I take the bishop. So by playing rook f6 here, you now create space for the king to run to f8 or f7, maybe even just manually castling the king to g7. And it's oddly enough somewhat okay for black, but only because the center is still somewhat closed, and because this knight on c5 is so effective at holding this pawn on e4. So after rook f6, here Dubov makes the first mistake. Now again, it's hard to really be critical of this move because the position is still okay, and white is not losing or anything. But the last chance for white to keep an advantage here was to play the move rook to b5, attacking the knight on c5. And after black plays the move c6 to remove the rook b6 here, computer gives white an advantage. But after bishop d7, let's just say queen b1, king f8, white is about 0.5 to 0.6 better. But there is no clear-cut way for white to break through because you're still keeping grip on the e4 pawn, and it's still a closed file here. So here Dubov plays queen b1. Again, very logical human move, trying to keep the attack going. The king on e8 is stuck in the center, and you figure now you have ideas like rook b8 check, you have queen b5 check, or even bishop b5 check next move, and you still keep an eye on the pawn at e4 by creating the classic Pythagoras right triangle. Knight takes b7 is played here by Vidit. Very good move, played after a long think, perfect calculation here, and from this point on, for the rest of the game, Vidit basically plays like he's a cheater. He plays every top stockfish move. Now, again, to be clear, of course, Vidit is playing and using his brain. He is a humanoid, but he plays this as though he were stockfish. So knight takes b7 is played here. Queen takes b7 is played by Dubov, and now Vidit plays rook d8. The only move here, if you do not play rook d8, you lose your rook. It's just game over. So rook to d8 is played here. Knight takes f5 is played by Dubov. Again, at this point, black now has a rook for a knight. So if black can get this king to g7 here, black is just going to eventually long-term be winning due to the material advantage that he has. It's also worth noting that another logical human move here to play would be knight c6, forking the rook and the queen. However, here black has a great reply, which is queen to c5, which attacks both the knight and the bishop. And after knight takes rook, black can go queen c4, and now your knight on d8 is kind of boxed. You can't go to c6 because my rook and queen guard it. And if you try to play a move like queen b8 here, I go rook to b6, queen to a8, and now I have the very nice move here of rook to, I think it's rook to a6, or is it queen a6? I'm not 100% sure. I guess I'll look at the moves. But after a move like rook to a6 here, the queen and the knight here get stuck in the corner, and black is much better. So here knight takes f5 is played by Dubov, which is the best human move. Rook takes f5, rook takes e4. Now here Vidit again finds the best move. He plays rook to d1. He does not play rook to e5. This move would actually lose here because now white can play queen to c6 check. If you block with the queen, then white just takes the rook on e5 and you simply resign. So you can't block. If you block with the rook on d7 here, white now goes queen g6 check. You cannot block with the queen because then of course I take your queen. You don't want to Botez Gambit your queen unless you're doing a speed run like I am. Make sure to check out our speed run videos if you haven't already. Okay, king f8 is another move. After king to f8, there is queen to g8 checkmate here. The bishop and the queen guard each other and the king is stuck. And if you go king to d8 here, white can play queen to g8 check. You block with your queen, and now rook takes e5. You cannot capture the rook because that would put your king in check, and you have to trade the queens, and now white is simply up a bishop in this endgame with rooks on the board. So after rook takes e4 is played, Vidit plays rook d1. Absolute best move, throw in the check. As we like to tell beginners, look for checks. You never know, it could be checkmate. So king to h2 is played by Dubov, and now Vidit plays rook to e5, blocking the pin on the e file here. Queen c6 check is played, and now Vidit goes king d8. Not king f8 again, because you would run into another Pythagoras right triangle after queen h6, king to e8, queen to h8 check, and now the king and the rook are under attack, and again, you would lose the game here after king d7, and rook takes e5. So king d8 is the only move that you can play here. And now here, Dubov plays queen to a8. Now there are two moves here that are playable. The human move that looks right on the spot is to play bishop b5. It looks very dirty because now if you take the rook on e4, there's queen to a8 checkmate. Your king cannot go up to d7 because the bishop on b5 covers the square. So this looks really good for white. However, here there's a very nice move, queen to d6. If white trades, you take with a pawn and you guard your rook, so white doesn't want to trade. And after queen a8, king e7, white can play queen e8, king f6, and make a draw with queen h8, king f5, queen h7, king f6, queen h8, but white has nothing better than making a draw here. Additionally, there's a classic call the ambulance situation where you might think, well, wait, white can go queen e8 check. And after rook e8, I just take the rook with mate. Wait, why can't I take the rook? What's that sound? Oh, look, my king is actually in check on h2 here. So you would actually walk into a discovered checkmate, so you cannot take with the rook and create checkmate. So that's another unfortunate situation for white as well. Anyway, bishop b5 would have been enough for the draw with the line we pointed out, but instead what happens is queen to a8 check is played here. Now king to d7 is played by Vidit. Dubov plays bishop b5. Vidit goes king to e6, not king to d6 by the way, because then there's queen c6, which is just checkmate. So king to e6 is played here by Vidit, and now queen to c8 check is played. King to f6. Queen to h8, and now Vidit plays king f5. And this is a critical moment in the game. There was a very good tweet here from Boris Avruk over on Twitter, and I guess I will show it to you guys very briefly so you can see it once again. I might have to adjust this just so you can see it, but let's pull this up. We have this good old tweet from Boris Avruk, and it says, "Life is good, but this is not the way to play for a win. 32 f3 double question mark instead of repeating with 32 queen c8." So this is a tweet from the strong Israeli grandmaster Boris Avruk. His peak rating was around 2660. Worked with a lot of top players over the years. So back to the game. So king f5 is played here, and this is where Dubov makes a fatal blunder. He plays 32 f3 double question mark. Now, again, one thing that we try to reiterate is that you do want to do puzzles. Now, you guys probably noticed I played in the Puzzle Rush World Championship very recently, and I did relatively well. I didn't win, but a lot of people were wondering, well, you know, these are puzzles, it's memorization. Why do you keep doing this? And the reason is because when you do puzzles and you spot tactics, it really helps with your general vision and awareness on the board. And the reason here is because there's queen to c8 check. Now, you might think, wait a second, what is this check? I just eat the rook on e4, but this actually loses due to geometry. White can play queen to g4 check. King cannot go to any squares forward. F3 is covered by the pawn. E3 covered by the pawn. D3 covered by the bishop. So now you go king to d5, and white can go queen c4 check. Bishop guards the queen. King to d6, and now queen c6 is checkmate here, and you lose the game. So in this position, if queen c8 had been played here by Dubov and he had spotted this classic right triangle setup again, he would have been able to save the game. And after black goes king to f6, you just go queen h8. If black plays king g6, you go queen g8, and all roads lead to a draw as well as Rome. So queen c8 is not played here. Instead, Dubov plays f3, and after this move, this is pretty much like a resignation offer because black can trade the rooks, and now you only have a queen and a bishop on the board, and black's king is relatively safe in the center of the board. And more importantly, black's queen can check the white king on these dark squares of d6 and e5. So your queen is also very open on h2. So king takes e4 is played. Queen to h8 is played here. King to e3 by Vidit, and now he runs the king down to c1 where it will be very safe with the rook guarding it. Bishop to c6 is played here by Dubov. Again, a very strange move that's very much like a resignation. He could have tried queen f3. I think at this point, seeing that it's such a beautiful game by Vidit, I probably would have gone queen f3, king d2, queen to f2, king c1, and resigned at this point after black has gone on classic king walk, f8, g7, f6, f5, e4, e3, d2, c1. It's like the good old Kasparov game from the old days. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That king sure got its exercise in this game. But I guess Dubov decided that black king had got enough exercise. He didn't want to try to chase the king down the board. So after king to e3, he plays bishop to c6 here. And now Vidit plays queen to e5 check, attacking the king. And after g3, g4 is played by Vidit. Another nice move, threatening to go queen h5 and checkmate on h3. Say white plays a4, queen to h5 check, king to g2, and now queen h3 or queen to h1. Both of these moves are checkmate. So here queen a7 is played by Dubov. Vidit goes king to d2, and now Dubov resigns the game in view of the fact that checkmate is unstoppable. You don't really have a way to stop this check and mate, and if you play queen to f2, which is the only way to sort of prevent the mate on the spot, black will go queen e2, trade the queens, or even king c1 for the beauty prize, and win the game on the spot. But queen e2 is probably simplest. Just trade the queens, and again, white's pawns are just nothing, and you have a rook versus a bishop, so it's very cleanly winning. So overall, great game by Vidit. Pretty much every move he played from rook f8 on was perfect. I think actually even before that, it was essentially a perfect game by Vidit. When we look at this position, we go back. Sorry, wrong position. We go back to this position. From this point on, move 18 onwards, Vidit played a perfect game. So from move 18 all the way to the end of the game on move 39, he played 21 perfect moves. Obviously, we know that it looks like Vidit was cheating, but he is a humanoid. And nothing but credit to him. I would say out of all the games that I've seen Vidit play, I haven't seen a lot of them, but the ones I've seen in person or studied on ChessBase, hands down, absolutely the best game I've ever seen played by Vidit, and he should be very proud. He's obviously leading the tournament, and hopefully he'll be able to keep rolling along and keep the lead in the Tata Steel Masters, you guys. All right, so there's your analysis of this game played by Vidit today. That was actually a lot of fun. I know a lot of people said that when I recorded an analysis off stream, that it wasn't, it felt stilted or I was reading off a script. Of course, I was not reading off a script, but it's different when you have the chat to feed off of, certainly. So anyway, that's my analysis of the game. But really, really good game played by Vidit, and I have nothing but admiration, and beautiful. No, beautiful. Nothing but props to him, and I really hope that he keeps it going. He's a very nice guy. Obviously, you could tell how happy he was when he won the game. Like, you could tell, like, he was really happy. And so I wish him nothing but the best. And obviously, it's better than hanging your king like he did against me. So anyway, yeah.